My goal for this project was that not have a single historian find something wrong with a story. That was like really, really important to me because I was learning a lot as I went.
Welcome to Amusing Jews, where we celebrate Jewish contributors and contributions to American popular culture. I'm Jonathan Friedmann.
And I'm Joey Angelfield.
Producer engineer Mike Tomren is working somewhere behind the scenes. Amusing Jews is a project of Adat Chaverim Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Cool Shul Jewish Cultural Community, and Atheists United Studios. Hey, Joey. When we think about the impact of Jews on comic books, our thoughts usually turn to superheroes. Arguably, without Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel's creation Superman, there'd be no superheroes at all, or at least not as we know them. Without Bill Finger and Bob Kane, there'd be no Batman. And without Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, there'd be no roster of iconic Marvel superheroes. But Jewish creators have been just as influential in reality-based comic books and graphic novels, from Will Eisner's Lower East Side Tenement stories to Art Spiegelman's account of his father's experiences as a Holocaust survivor, to Eileen Kaminsky-Crumb's autobiographical comics. And we're not even scratching the surface. A terrific new contribution comes from today's guest.
We're delighted to talk with Josh Tuininga, an author, illustrator, and musician whose debut graphic novel, We Are Not Strangers, follows his grandfather's efforts to help his Japanese-American neighbors who were incarcerated during World War II. Josh is also the founder and creative director of the design firm The Medium, has 2 children's books, Why Blue and Dream On, and makes music with his wife in the duo To the River. Josh, welcome to Amusing Jews.
Hey guys, thank you so much for having me on. This is awesome.
Without giving too much away, could you summarize We Are Not Strangers for those in our audience who haven't read it yet, and maybe why the story is relevant today?
Yeah, sure. So this project started with a story that my uncle told me about attending his grandfather's funeral. And it was a typical Jewish event, close family and friends, people he hadn't seen in years. There were some people he didn't recognize at all. A handful of Japanese American guests started to arrive, and nobody knew who they were or why they came. And so what my uncle found out is that his grandfather had helped these families when they were forced out of the neighborhood and incarcerated during World War II. So the story only took a couple minutes to tell me, but I just couldn't stop thinking about it. You know, like how does a Jewish immigrant with family still overseas, threatened by the Holocaust, end up helping out his Japanese American neighbors here at home? And so this story kind of is about the type of environment that creates that remarkable kind of relationship.
You did an excellent job of depicting your grandfather's Sephardic community and his friend's neighboring Japanese community. Could you tell us a bit about these communities and how they overlapped and intersected?
You know, it isn't very well known, but there's a really strong connection between the Japanese and Jewish communities here in the Northwest. And one of the foundations of that can be found here in the Seattle Central District neighborhood. So this was a place where immigrants and minorities who were, blocked from renting or buying in other neighborhoods at the time could start to build their home for themselves in this neighborhood. And so, this really unique community formed there where people from, a lot of different backgrounds lived up against each other. And this created, this opportunity for people from different backgrounds and cultures to get to know each other as friends and neighbors. So when I learned that there was such a large, concentration. That's one of the things I learned. There's such a large concentration of, Jewish immigrants. The area had the nickname Little Jerusalem, and became home to some of the first, Sephardic synagogues in the country. And then it was also the location of Nihonmachi, which is the Japantown, and which was like the cultural hub for the Japanese community. So yeah, and when I started to learn more about this area, I started to come across other stories of people who reached out to help their neighbors during the war, and this kind of became the setting of the story.
That's amazing. So are you maybe actively collecting other stories, and will there be more to come?
I when I first heard the story, I thought this was just kind of a really unique story, but more, like I said, more I heard about this area, they kind of started coming out of the woodwork. And then now that this book has been published, that's been a really neat part of the process to hear about more and more stories that have come out from the area. And I think that would be a really cool opportunity to do more with this story, but we'll see.
Enjoying the show? Click like and subscribe. In the introduction to the book, author Ken Mochizuki reminds us that in the 1970s, the old melting pot ideal of immigration was replaced with the flower garden metaphor, people sharing the same soil but retaining their distinct ethnic and cultural identities. You do a great job of presenting Japanese and Jewish characters as comfortably American, but also rooted in their respective cultures. How important was it for you to avoid stereotypical depictions that come so naturally to cartooning?
Yeah, so representing different cultures was definitely one of the most important things to consider when writing this book. So yeah, as a Jewish person who grew up Jewish, that was an easy thing for me to represent. To start strong part of my culture and identity. But on the other side of the story, I really relied on interviews with my Japanese friends and community members to make sure I was getting things right. And another thing that made it easier was finding like source material. So that was the case like when designing my characters and doing my artwork and stuff like that. I looked at a lot of old pictures and reference materials that way. But the same went for creating my storylines. I really wanted like all the things that happened to these characters to come from true stories or anecdotes that I'd pick up along the way in interviews and archives and stuff like that. And luckily there was, tons of resources for that. I hooked up with Densho, which is the Japanese incarceration archive here in Seattle. And they were an amazing resource. And then also met with Washington State Jewish Historical Society here, and professors at University of Washington. I mean, obviously my goal for this project was to not have a single historian find something wrong with a story. That was like really, really important to me because I was learning a lot as I went, and so, yeah, that just became a really good way to tackle this.
Yeah, I've heard that from other graphic novelists who sort of tackle historical content, this anxiety of being kind of an outsider, non-historian, but telling a very real story and not wanting to get it wrong because images are so powerful, right? Because it's very easy to kind of miss a detail and change someone's perception just by doing something wrong.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, the fear is real, especially when you're starting a project like this. Yeah, I think that's a good way I think that's, partly I just want to get my facts straight and do a good job, but also, I just really, when it is something so important like this, it becomes more and more important the more people you talk to, and that reinforces that you're doing the right thing, which is helpful. But yeah, no, it's funny to hear. I haven't heard other people talk about that, but I would love to talk to other people who have tackled because it was a process. Yeah.
You have a great illustration in the book comparing a black-hatted Hasidic Jew, an image that comes to mind for many when they picture a stereotypical Jew, and a Sephardic man wearing a vest and a fez, more typical of Jews from Turkey and Rhodes. Of course, even these are just two of countless varieties of Jews from around the world. How important is it for you to educate about Jewish diversity through your art?
Yeah, like you said, when most people think of Jewish culture, they think of, matzo ball soup, speaking Yiddish, the stereotypical, Jewish person in media and pop culture everywhere. So those are Ashkenazic Jewish people who originated from Central and Eastern Europe. But Sephardic Jews come from Spain, Portugal, the Middle East. The fundamentals are the same, but they have different customs and foods. And yeah, so this was something I was like really, really excited to represent in the story. Because that's kind of Sephardic Jewish history that's part of my upbringing and background. And, a Sephardic Jewish main character wasn't something I had seen a lot of, especially in comic books. So, yeah, that was a really exciting thing for me to be able to tackle here.
I was excited to see representation. I'm also, got a Sephardic background and, I know a little bit about Sephardic culture, but it's kind of like nice that it's in an updated way, in a graphic novel. It's pretty awesome, to be honest with you, to see it depicted as such, because right, there's all of these shows on Netflix and such about depicting Eastern European Judaism, things like that, and it's nice in a non-tokenized way. It also rang really true to me, both from the food and the Ladino that they were speaking, and just looking at the family relations. It felt very authentic, and I hope that it's Yeah, I mean, it's educational, and it's also kind of more deep than that.
Well, that's really cool to hear. I think that happens, I think the reason that happens is because I just kind of grew up with that surrounded by that environment. And so, and my, my grandparents are gone now. And that's like one of the biggest things about, this story is it's kind of like connecting with them and connecting their past. I definitely have like a romantic view of how they grew up in this neighborhood with this community, especially now with all these like, everybody's kind of a little more divided, it feels, compared to how it was back then and stuff. And that was just a part of their culture. But yeah, just kind of, that like the question you asked before, like that was the easy part for me to represent because it just was kind of just around me. And so I'm glad that came through. It's really cool.
I'll say from a historical perspective, I think that they probably were divided. I know somebody who was studying Sephardic communities, and they were a little divisive, but anyways, we can kind of gloss over that.
No, I think that's absolutely true. Well, and my grandparents, my grandfather was Sephardic and my grandmother was Ashkenazic, and that was like a huge no-no at the time.
But that's the same for my grandparents, and looking at the ways that they navigated that, and now we're a new generation, kind of looking at exploring our identities. Looking a little more outward, you also run workshops at schools in your area. What do those involve, and what's your mission with that work?
Yeah, so I do teach comics and art classes here in North Bend, Washington. I teach kind of drawing fundamentals. We do still lifes, figure drawings, even worked with a little bit of flipbook animation, stuff like that. My mission, I don't know, no one's really asked me that before. What my mission is, I think if I had to answer that, I think my mission would have to be like trying to provide an art class experience that is different than the art classes that I grew up with when I was a kid. So, I mean, when I grew up, comics were not taken seriously, first of all. And then a lot of my art classes as a kid were about, just following the rules, following the steps of just kind of how to do something generic, I guess. It wasn't until I went into college and into art school that I started learning about how to make art and in a different way. And I think young kids are definitely ready for that. I definitely was. And so, yeah, I guess I'm trying to provide a way for kids to like learn ways to hone their skills a little earlier, not be afraid to dive into different approaches or mediums like comics, and I'm definitely amazed about how talented kids are nowadays compared to so many of my students that I've worked with are like light years ahead of where I was when I was a kid. And that's really pretty cool to see. So.
Yeah, and comics are such the cultural vernacular as well, particularly for the younger generation, that it's a way to get them excited about art in a way that maybe, watercolors of a bowl of fruit doesn't always work.
Yeah. It's almost like a reverse, you can learn to do that later, gets you excited and passionate first, and then you can start honing your skills. So yeah, well, that's good observation.
I saw on your Spotify profile that you record out of a converted Bluebird bus, and it looks like maybe you're in that bus right now. Can you tell us a little more about your studio?
Yeah, so this is where I draw, write, make some music. This kind of it just happened to be when my kids were really young. When they were born, and I had all my art materials out, and I always had to put stuff away. It was like we have kind of a small house, so I was like, I need a little more room. And was thinking about different solutions, and then I was looking for like maybe building a small outbuilding or doing something else. And then this bus popped up on Craigslist from an old Burning Man hippie guy whose dream was to get it running, drive it down to Burning Man. And so I went and checked it out, and we had it towed here, and I gutted it out, put a wood stove in it, and it's been a great little space. So. That's kind of the story behind the bus.
You make music with your wife, Lisa, as the duo To the River, which uses analog instruments, electronic synths, beats, and vocals.
Some may say you're the only one. I always heard it was me.
The vibe is very mellow. Would it be accurate to characterize it as Pacific Northwest mellow?
Yeah, I like that description. I like it's like the type of music that you would make when you haven't seen the sun for 7 months. It's like super chill music, kind of lo-fi. So I like that association with the environment up here. That was not intentional by any means, but I think reflecting on that, I think that's pretty right on. When you live in a climate that's rainy and dark most of the time, it's best to have some indoor activities that you love to do. And making music with my wife is definitely just awesome. And you're a musician too, is that right, Jonathan?
Yeah.
What kind of music do you do?
I had a group, if you want to check it out, back in the day called Rabbinical School Dropouts, which is like a klezmer jazz mashup kind of all over the place ensemble.
Okay, I'm definitely going to be checking that out. That sounds great. That's
Rabbinical
cool.
School Dropouts, rest in peace.
Oh man, it's awesome.
Maybe we should include the shout out as a way of alluding to the fact that they also wrote our theme music.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Oh no way! I love that intro song.
Yeah,
that's really
us.
cool.
That's us.
That's cool. So is that an intro song that was written, or is that just? Did you just take that from an old?
It was it was an unused, unproduced recording that I happen to have, and it's it.
Oh man, it's a great sound. Loved it.
On the music topic, your 2019 children's book, Dream On, introduces decades of classic rock and R&B music through the story of a mother and daughter struggling to find common ground. It's a bedtime story, and it's also a music history primer. Have you heard from parents and kids who have read the book and found their own common ground through exploring this music?
So the idea for that book was to tell the entire story using song titles. The radio is in the story is kind of the narrator of the book and plays music, and these song titles come up and kind of acts as the narration for the story. So at the end of the book, there's a playlist. And so, I've heard of from parents who have listened to the playlist with their kids. That's been pretty fun to hear about. When I grew up, my parents always had music playing in the house, and it was a great way to talk about music and talk about different genres and, what the musicians were trying to say and convey in the music. And so it's cool to hear that Dream On has created that opportunity a little bit for some people.
You have another children's book called Why Blue. Can you tell us a little bit about that book and maybe answer the question, why blue?
Yeah, well, that book, that was my first attempt at writing a children's book. It was just kind of, my kids were around the age when, first of all, we were reading a lot of children's books. Some of them were great classics, just amazing. And, there was a lot of them that I was just kind of like, these aren't great. I could do one of these. It was a lot harder than I thought it would be though. They were around the age of like, those just that questions. They're always asking questions, so many questions. So that's what this book is about. It's like this daughter who's asking the classic question, why is the sky blue? She's going around her community, not really satisfied with any of the answers she's getting from everything from scientists and, a blues musician to, a baker baking blueberries, cinnamon rolls, whatever, there's all these kind of themes of color and asking questions and just being inquisitive as a kid. So, I'm not going to give it away the ending, but she comes up with a satisfying enough answer for herself.
And it's better than because.
Yeah, she comes across that too, but it's better than that. Yeah, it's a lot more satisfying.
And I was just kind of wondering, maybe who some of your artistic influences are.
I was kind of I was a little bit late to the game with like serious comic books and graphic novels. When I was a kid, I was super into just the Sunday funnies, and trying to do those on my own. I worshipped Bill Larson, Calvin and Hobbes. In my mind, still, I look at him as like just a fine artist. I mean, just the skills that it takes to draw that well. So that was always a goal of mine. Like I mentioned earlier, comics were not, it wasn't like people weren't encouraging me to be like the most ambitious with that. But my dad was an artist, and he encouraged me, but he also like really pushed me into and encouraged me with just fine art and stuff like that. So I went to art school, tried to be a real artist for a while, and then I slowly came back to comics and comic books, and now that's like my life. So
you mentioned that perceptions of comics have changed. Do you think that we can now say that comics artists are real artists?
I mean, I feel like I can definitely say that about other comic artists. I have a hard time with that word for myself. I think so. I think there's still there. I think that obviously it's come such a long way, and they're, half the stuff that you see on Netflix is, based on a comic book. Sometimes people aren't aware, but there's still a long way to go. I mean, doing these talks and doing presenting my book to the community, I get a lot of people who are, even my age or older, who are like, I've never read a comic book, and isn't this and this, they still have questions. They're still questioning it. They're still kind of like probably think that it is still just a bunch of superheroes just getting into silly fights with each other, and there's not really any weight to it. But yeah, it's been cool to see that, people open up a graphic novel for the first time and connect with it. But yeah, I think to answer your question, yes, it's like, to me, the ultimate fine art. I love it. I think I respect it more than anything.
Do you have any other books or graphic novels in the works?
I have so many projects started, and I just have to kind of figure out which one to land on. Yeah, one of the biggest things I think I learned, this was my first graphic novel, and that's probably one of the biggest things I learned throughout the whole thing. It was just how long and painstaking it is to make one of these things. Yeah, I'm taking things pretty slow, trying to figure out kind of what makes sense that I want to kind of immerse myself in for a number of years. But yeah, I definitely want to do it again. Really, really fun experience. And yeah, I'm kind of hooked. So let's see what happens.
Well, we'll be on the lookout.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for joining us, Josh.
Thank you so much too. I'm excited to listen to your music and check that out, and listen to more of these podcasts. It's been fun to discover your guys' podcasts. It's really cool.
And to our audience, now back to your regularly scheduled lives.
Amusing Jews is here to amuse you. If you like being amused, go ahead and click like and subscribe.